on this notion of mental health and behavioral health applications of search data, I did want to point out that there is an ongoing study at the University of Washington doing prospective data collection that consents the patient for actively contributing their data. This is not look-back data. And in our understanding and collaborations with others in the National Health Service, that uses of Google Internet search data has been a part of a number of research studies that are ongoing there. I'd like to turn next now to our Q&A sessions, and I'm going to open this up for you. Please feel free to come to the microphone if you would like. I'd like to first turn to Anna to address this from the standpoint of large data overall and research opportunities. You've certainly been working at the intersection of industry and government for quite a while now, and looking at real-world evidence, the uses of remote sensing data. Where do you think this, in your perspective, the opportunities for researchers to start answering questions of clinical significance around medical diagnosis lies? What's your candid assessment at this point in time?
Is that on?
Yes.
Hard for me to tell. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for attending, especially during lunchtime. I have skeptical optimism, if that makes any sense. From a personal perspective, I think there are a lot of things that we can learn from this data from a population health perspective. I haven't quite gotten my head around how we're going to solve from a logistical perspective for individual diagnosis. I think there probably are some very specific use cases for which this kind of thing could be helpful. Some of the mental health studies that were presented and were represented in this excellent survey that your team did are interesting. But from what I can see, I wonder how that's going to scale, and I wonder how that's going to get incorporated into the clinical workflow of most physicians. And I struggle to see how that's actually going to work. I would love to be proven, I would love for somebody to develop a way, and maybe these projects will illuminate how this might be able to be done. But when I think about all of the competing sources of information that most physicians look at, and like the limitations of the workflow of the electronic health record, and just the challenges that we're seeing with as data begins to be exchanged through TEFCA, with the consumption of just CCDA documentation, which can be 200 pages per patient, speaking personally, I'm not sure how this is going to work, but I would love to see it work. I mean, I do think that there are specific cases where it could be incredibly helpful, and it would have been fun to have seen case study proposals or research proposals in those areas. For instance, long COVID would be one area where I would think that people who are struggling to figure out a whole cluster of strange symptoms, maybe diagnoses that are a little weird, their doctor doesn't quite have a handle on. I think something like that could be really interesting. Another area, I've done a lot of work over the years, and my primary focus is really around data governance and trust frameworks, particularly from the perspective of engaging patients and the use of secondary data for research. I've done a lot of work with rare disease communities, and that's one area where I think the nuances that present themselves, particularly in rare diseases, and the diagnostic odyssey that a lot of rare patients go through, could be shortened by some sort of a proactive use. And in both the long COVID cohorts as well as in rare disease cohorts, these are people and groups that are struggling to get accurate diagnosis, and it's very difficult to actually get that accurate diagnosis with current clinical tools and diagnostic tools. So those kinds of areas, I think, offer a lot of potential for this sort of use, where you could proactively consent people to do this and say, hey, this might help illuminate some specifics, that will help us truly understand what your disease might be.
Thank you. I wondered if, speaking about this from the consumer patient side in terms of use of their own information, and you've had a lot of experience about this, what's the general trend that you see in terms of patients wanting to do more and incorporate more about their own data, about themselves, into their own understanding of their own well-being? Can you comment on that as well? Just what do we do with all this device information? How is it really helping patients with their own lifestyle changes?
Well, I mean, to back up a little bit, I got into this. I have a BA in journalism and background in public affairs, and as a frustrated patient with type 1 diabetes, I became really interested in the potential for secondary data sources to augment what I see as significant shortcomings of RCTs, particularly as it relates to regulatory approvals, as well as reimbursement decisions. So 13 years ago, I co-founded a company with a friend of mine who had a background in data analytics to do big data analytics through a visual interface, and that sort of launched me into this new world, and which has been great and fascinating, and it's an incredible opportunity to learn many things. One of the things that I did is help start a patient hacker movement in the type 1 space, which is global. I just did some of the nerdy policy things in the very beginning, and like the real hackers took control. And I'm now running a closed loop artificial pancreas system off my phone that's all been crowdsourced and developed, and it's one of the more brilliant things. But in that process, we also discovered not just how to connect our devices in a way that was faster than regulatory approvals, but we began to see, as people who live with sensor data 24/7, the power of those sensors to actually illuminate far more meaningful digital biomarkers than what you would see in the traditional biomarkers, blood-based biomarkers. I think, the quantified self movement kind of had a moment. I don't know that it's still as au courant as it was maybe pre-pandemic, but there are many of us who track lots of different factors. I've got an Apple Watch that does a whole bunch of things. I've got an Oura Ring, constantly tracking sleep and correlating in my mind all of these different sensor inputs. If I would be able to add my search criteria to that type of data, I think that could be interesting. Particularly, I'm like many other patients, am using ChatGPT-4 for many things. I'm currently in the midst of sort of a health mystery, where things don't make sense, and each of my specialists only looks at one particular organ, and I'm trying to figure out what are the overall trends that might be causing these issues with my eyes and kidneys and nerves that don't fit within what we typically see in type 1 diabetes. And like it's just, everyone's like, I don't know. But ChatGPT has given me some clues. So if we would be able to integrate that data with my sleep data and, develop perhaps algorithms that could pull all of that and make sense of it, it would be potentially incredibly powerful. How many people are going to do that? I don't know. I would say it depends on how desperate they are.
Great, well, thank you for that perspective. And again, if anyone has questions, just shout them out. Otherwise, I'm going to continue with my questions to the panel here. To our researchers, and Henry, I would include this in your thoughts here. So likelihood is that you are all have been or will be the first in your institutions to take this on. And maybe you've already decided that this wasn't a good idea, but tell us and share with the group what has been some of the big challenges that you faced just from the administration of being a PI, and what can we do to help make this more of a streamlined part of health services research or medical research in general, what are the things you've learned that can help sort of lower the threshold for entry for others?
I'll go first quickly. I think when we first brought this to our ethics IRB board, they wanted to cry. And they said, well, Lisa, show us what the data looks like in a structured way. And I think what we learned is Google actually doesn't have, say, Google take out a test example sandbox data set. And being able to create one and build a robust one, I think will be very useful for the whole community, because then you realize it's not dangerous, it can be done well and simply, but having an example is always a good thing.
Okay, so it's a great question. So our university has been very supportive, so I want to say that. Our institutional review board was actually very supportive and didn't really put up a lot of barriers. Our IT department was a little concerned, and so I had several meetings with them. When I met with the medical director of the addictions clinic, we had to really work through logistics. So I think that's really the biggest barrier, because since we're working with a more stigmatized condition, we wanted to be thoughtful in how we would recruit patients and approach them. And so one of the things our medical director suggested is that we come up with a participant guide that really walks them through how to download their own data, but we would still have a research assistant with them. But then as part of that guide, we kind of repeat the privacy, how to address privacy and how their data will be secure, just to provide some reassurance. And we submitted that to the IRB as well to get approval. So those are some of the logistics we've worked on so far.
So another issue is funding, of course. And I think that the kind of funding that this pilot program is providing is pretty rare. that a lot of the work that needs to be done seems to fall in between NSF's field of comfort and NIH's field of comfort. So, and although there are, there's one program, joint NSF, NIH on cyber health, it's way underfunded. So I think that's a good thing. A lot of the work I've done, the medical collaborators are sort of almost doing that the goodness of their hearts.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. And Anna, please chime in on this one too. What do patients really know about their lives that lives in Google and Bing? And how do you convey that element of control to the patient? Meaning, there's stuff in there about every aspect of their life, from financial to travel to search to what they do in their free time. Most people probably don't know what's in there. How do we convey those things to people that don't really understand those concepts?
Well, I think this is an important question, and it gets into why I'm both skeptical and optimistic about the use of this kind of data. I mean, I was one of the original co-guys for the All of Us program, and early in the development of that, we had a pretty robust discussion, or series of discussions about whether or not we wanted to use, passive data collected from web searches and, other sources, digital footprint or breadcrumbs, as part of the All of Us program as one of the types of data to be used. And I was actually very pro-use of this data, because I feel like there are a lot of people using this data for these kinds of things, so why limit it? Why cut off medical research? The reality is that all of this data is being consumed, it's being traded. Theoretically, it's de-identified, but we all know that they use tokenization to knit these data sources back together. Health insurance companies have remarkably detailed data dossiers on each of the people in their care portfolio about income, purchasing, location, very detailed, intimate details. While we struggle over and sort of argue over the ethics of whether or not a health insurance company should be able to access clinical data, they already know a lot. And there's only limited awareness. I think most people will be appalled if they truly understand the kind of intimate details that are out there being traded and sold by data brokers. So the question is do we want to, under the guise of ethics, and I say this as somebody who speaks from the perspective of a patient and works on trust, so I have many questions about this, but there is a question, do we, under the guise of ethics, which is incredibly important in medical research, want to limit the use of this kind of secondary data to the people who are looking at it for potential benefits on behalf of patients? I don't honestly know where I stand on that particular issue. On the one hand, it seems like it doesn't make sense letting all of the quote-unquote cynical uses of this data be done without any, any limitations. On the other hand, it's creepy. Do we really want to consent to that? And is that really an appropriate thing for medical researchers to be doing? I don't really know where I fall on that yet, but I do think it's something that probably should be discussed more. It should be discussed more and explored in public forums and really considered, both within the context of what could happen in the guise of medical research, as well as really being honest with ourselves and with one another about the extent to which all of these details are already out there. People are already doing research for it. It just is about stuff that we may not approve, for which we may not, we don't think is ethical and could potentially be used against us.
Well, maybe we're not that far away from the time when you, as researchers, get an alert on your smartphone that says, this new patient in Salina, Kansas is eligible for this particular study. Are you interested in talking to them? The wonders of technology and engineering and information sciences have brought us to the potential of answering these new questions and advancing research science further. And I think for the opportunities that AcademyHealth and its membership have here is helping us to address not only the methodology, but also the social context of equity and who gets to use this technology into the future. So unfortunately we're at time. I would encourage you to interact, and all of the researchers in this project have been very gracious about sharing their practices. So we're at the end of this session. I want to thank Michael and AcademyHealth for their partnership in this project, and we'll look forward to more discussions in the future. Thanks to all of our panelists.